At 24, Alara had already lost her mother, her inheritance, and the quiet regard of her own blood. Her sisters, Cora and Lena, sharp and quick in their city suits and sensible shoes, had taken the house with its warm kitchen and the savings that sat gathering tidy interest in the town bank, leaving her only with the deed to the useless backfield, a thing they valued at $1, just to make the paperwork feel legal and final. They had laughed as they drove away from the lawyer's office, a short, brittle sound that the wind snatched and tore apart, their clean cars kicking up dust from the gravel road that led back to their real lives. But what nobody knew, what the new survey filed with the county clerk and stapled to the sale agreement missed entirely, was the thin, dotted line on the original plat map. A map drawn not by a stranger, but in her own mother's careful, patient hand. A line that changed the shape of everything. That, though, comes later. First, there was the quiet. The house, once filled with the scent of baking bread and the low hum of her mother's voice, now held only the smell of dust and the echo of conversations that had felt more like transactions. Her mother, Marion, had faded not like a photograph, but like a watercolor left in the sun, the vibrant hues of her life softening at the edges, then dissolving into a pale, tired wash. Alara had been there for the fading. She had been the one to hold the cup of water to her mother's lips, the one to read from the worn book of poems by the bedside lamp, the one whose hand her mother sought in the long, still hours of the night. Her sisters had visited, of course, bringing with them the scent of perfume and the faint, anxious energy of the city. They brought expensive, cellophane-wrapped fruit baskets that sat untouched on the counter. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones in the hallway, their words like sharp pebbles thrown against the quiet grief of the house. They talked of logistics, of timelines, of responsibilities, their sorrow shaped like a spreadsheet. Alara heard them. She heard the words burden and inevitable and arrangements. She said nothing. She simply returned to her mother's room, closed the door softly, and picked up the book of poems again, her voice a low murmur against the rising tide of their efficiency. After the funeral, the efficiency became a storm. Cora, the eldest, with her lawyer's mind and a gaze that could appraise and dismiss a person in the same instant, took charge. Lena, softer but pulled along in Cora's wake like a ship in tow, produced folders and forms. They moved through their mother's house not like daughters, but like professional liquidators. They sorted possessions into 3 piles: keep, sell, discard. The piles were brutally unequal. The sell pile grew into a mountain of antique furniture and carefully kept china. The discard pile was a heartbreaking testament to a life's small, personal treasures. The keep pile was mostly their own childhood belongings, things that reflected well on them. Alara watched them wrap her mother's favorite shawl, the one with the faint scent of lavender and earth, and place it in a box labeled donations. She said nothing. She walked over, took the shawl from the box, and wrapped it around her own shoulders. Cora's eyes narrowed. Really, Alara? It's old. Lena looked away, a faint blush of shame on her cheeks. Family is who shows up, her mother used to say, often while kneading dough or weeding a garden bed. It was a simple statement, delivered without judgment, but it had a weight to it. It was a measure. Alara felt that weight now, a stone in her chest, as she watched her sisters dismantle a home they had only ever visited. They did not seem to understand that a house was not just lumber and plaster, but a vessel for memory, a library of laughter and tears and the patient accumulation of days. To them, it was an asset to be leveraged. And she, the quiet youngest daughter who had never left, who had chosen the small town and the slow pace and the daily care of their mother over a career in a condo, she was not an asset. She was a complication, a loose end to be tidied up before the final accounting. The day at the lawyer's office was gray and damp, the sky the color of wet wool. The room smelled of old paper and furniture polish. Mr. Gable, the lawyer, was a man her mother had never liked, a man whose smile didn't reach his eyes. Cora did all the talking. She had the documents ready, the appraisals neatly clipped together. The house and its 5 acres of frontage, she explained, were worth a considerable sum. The savings, another tidy pile, split 3 ways. After expenses, it was a respectable inheritance. But, Cora said, leaning forward, her voice smooth and reasonable, there is the matter of the back field. She slid a piece of paper across the polished table. It was an appraisal. The back field, 10 acres of what was described as unimproved scrub and marshland, was valued at less than $1,000. It's landlocked, undevelopable, Cora said with an air of finality. Frankly, it's a liability. The property taxes alone. She let the sentence hang in the air. Lena fidgeted with the clasp on her purse. She would not meet Alara's eyes. So, Cora continued, her smile now fixed and bright, Lena and I have a proposal. We will handle the sale of the house. It's complicated, and you've been through so much. It was a kindness offered like a weapon. We will take on that burden. In exchange for your share of the primary estate, you can have the backfield. Outright. Free and clear. She pushed the deed across the table. We've even had it valued at $1 for the transfer, to save you on taxes. We're trying to be fair, Alara. Fair. The word was a parody in this sterile, airless room. They were offering her a patch of weeds her mother had loved in exchange for the roof over her head and the security her mother had worked her entire life to build. They were offering her a memory in exchange for a future. It was a masterful stroke of cruelty dressed up as generosity. Alara looked at their faces. Cora's, impatient and sharp. Lena's, clouded with a weak, complicit guilt. She thought of her mother, walking that field in the early morning, her old dog at her heels. She remembered the wildflowers she'd pick, the way she'd talk to the ancient oak tree as if it were an old friend. She remembered her mother's hands, covered in the dark, rich soil of that place. That field was the only part of her mother they hadn't been able to pack into a box or put a price tag on. It was the only piece of her that was left. She reached out a hand that was steady, though her heart felt like a trapped bird, and pulled the deed toward her. She did not look at the appraisal. She looked at the smudged, official map, the neat lines that boxed in a piece of the world. Her piece. Fine, she said. The word was small, but it landed in the room with the force of a gavel. A flicker of relief, predatory and bright, flashed in Cora's eyes. Lena let out a breath she seemed to have been holding all morning. Mr. Gable shuffled his papers, his professional neutrality a thin veneer over his satisfaction. She signed where they told her to sign. They took the house. They took the savings. They took everything that could be counted. They left her with the dirt. And as they left, their laughter echoing, Alara held the folded deed in her hand, the paper still warm from the office printer, and felt not the sting of being cheated, but the first faint whisper of a promise. She had the land her mother had loved, and the land, her mother always said, remembers. Her mother, Marion, was a woman made of quiet observations and patient hands. The town remembered her for the overflowing baskets of tomatoes she would leave on neighbors' porches, no note attached, the gift its own signature. They remembered her for the way she could listen, truly listen, her head tilted slightly, her gaze calm and unhurried, making you feel as though your small story was the most important thing in the world. Her older daughters remembered her as provincial, a woman who had shrunk her world down to a garden and a small town, a mild disappointment who hadn't shared their ambition. They had loved her in their way, but they had also pitied her. They had not seen her. Alara had. Alara knew her mother was not a woman of small horizons, but a woman who had chosen to go deep rather than wide. Her knowledge was not in stocks or boardrooms, but in the language of the clouds, the mood of the soil, the precise moment a blossom was ready to open. She kept records, but they were not financial. She had journals filled with notes on rainfall, on the first frost, on the day the swallows returned. She had a map of the property, the one her own father had given her, and she would sit with it at the kitchen table, tracing its lines with her finger, her expression distant and thoughtful. She spent hours in that backfield, the one everyone dismissed. She didn't plant crops there. She didn't clear it. She just tended it. She would haul stones, one by one, in an old wheelbarrow, rebuilding a crumbling wall that seemed to have no purpose. She would clear brush from around a marshy, low-lying area. She would sit under the great oak and just watch. "What are you doing back there, Mom?" Lena had asked once, on a rare weekend visit, her tone a mixture of curiosity and condescension. Marion had looked up from the stone she was wrestling into place, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes clear. "Measuring," she had said, and offered no further explanation. Cora had laughed it off later. "She's just pottering. It's what people do when they have too much time on their hands." But Alara saw that it wasn't pottering, it was work. It was deliberate. There was an intent to her mother's movements, a focus that was almost reverent. She was engaged in a long, slow conversation with that piece of land. She was a keeper of something, not just an owner. There was an aphorism she repeated, a phrase her own father had taught her. "Paid in full," she would say after a long day's work, not with weariness, but with a deep satisfaction. It wasn't about money, it was about effort, about attention, about a debt of care being met. When a neighbor's fence fell in a storm, Marion was there the next day with a post-hole digger and a thermos of coffee. When the neighbor tried to pay her, she just smiled and said, "We're all paid in full." The town understood this, even if her daughters didn't. The currency of her life was not cash, it was reciprocity, quiet acts of service that built a web of unseen, unspoken obligation and affection. She was the steady, beating heart of their small community, and her death left a silence that was more profound than any of them could have anticipated. The legacy she left was not in the bank, it was written in the landscape, in the memory of the people she had helped, and, as Alara was about to discover, in the very soil of the land she had refused to abandon. The first time Alara walked the backfield as its owner, the world felt raw and new. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The deed in her pocket was a strange weight, both a burden and an anchor. From the edge of the overgrown lawn behind the house, her sister's house now, the field looked exactly as they had described it, a 10-acre expanse of tangled brambles, tall, sun-bleached grass, and stubborn thistle. It was a forgotten place, a throwaway patch of green on the edge of usefulness. A broken-down stone wall, choked with ivy, traced a meandering line across the landscape. In the center, a single, magnificent oak tree stood like a sentinel, its bare branches a dark calligraphy against the pale sky. It looked worthless. It felt like a rebuke. But as she pushed her way through the tall grass, something shifted. The noise of the world, the cars on the distant highway, the echo of her sister's laughter, the sterile pronouncements of the lawyer, began to fade. It was replaced by the rustle of the wind in the dry weeds, the call of a lone hawk circling overhead, the soft thud of her own boots on the soil. This was a different kind of quiet from the one that now haunted the house. This was a living silence, full of texture and breath. She reached the great oak and laid a hand on its bark. The trunk was immense, a universe of moss and lichen and furrowed ridges. It felt ancient and alive, a witness. She looked out across the field from this vantage point and saw not a wasteland, but a tapestry. She saw the dip and sway of the land, the different shades of green and gold, the way the light fell in long, gentle fingers through the clouds. She felt a connection to it, a sense of belonging that the grander house no longer offered. The house was full of ghosts and arguments. The field was full of possibility. As she stood there, a movement at the edge of the property caught her eye. It was Gus, her mother's old dog. He was a slow, gray-muzzled shadow, his hips stiff, his eyes clouded with age. Her sisters had planned to take him to a shelter. "It's the kindest thing, Alara. We can't have a dog in the city." But Alara had held firm. It was one of the few battles she had won. He was hers now, or she was his. He trotted past her, his nose to the ground, with a sense of purpose she hadn't seen in him since her mother's last days. He made his way directly to the crumbling stone wall and, after sniffing at its base for a moment, lay down. He rested his chin on his paws and let out a soft sigh, his gaze fixed on the jumble of rocks as if he were standing guard. He would not be coaxed away. He had chosen his post. Alara walked over to him, her boots sinking slightly in the soft ground. The wall was strange. It wasn't a boundary marker. The real property line was 50 feet further east, marked by a line of old metal stakes. This wall just was. A long, low spine of rock running for 100 yards, starting nowhere and ending nowhere. It was a folly, an absurdity. And yet, her mother had spent years working on it. Why? As she pondered this, she heard a voice call her name. It was Mr. Abernathy from the hardware store, a man with kind eyes and hands permanently stained with grease and wood varnish. He was walking toward her, holding a steaming thermos. "Figured you might be out here," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "Cold day to be taking stock." He handed her a plastic cup and filled it with strong, sweet coffee. It warmed her hands, warmed her from the inside out. "Your mother," he said, looking not at Alara, but at the wall, at the dog standing his silent vigil. "She loved this piece of ground, saw things in it other folks missed." He took a sip from his own cup. "She bought supplies from me for this wall for 20 years. Cement, mortar, a good trowel. Never told me what it was for. Just said some things need protecting." He looked at Alara, his gaze direct and meaningful. "She used to say, 'The land remembers who tends it.' I think this land remembers her." He nodded toward the spot where Gus lay. "And so does that old dog." He finished his coffee, gave Alara's shoulder a brief, fatherly squeeze, and walked away, leaving her alone with the coffee, the dog, and the first stirring of a profound and unsettling question. Some things need protecting. What had her mother been protecting out here in the middle of nowhere? The days that followed took on a shape. Each morning, Alara would wake in the small room she'd rented in town, a place with thin walls and a view of a brick alleyway, and feel a pang of dislocation. The house on the hill, her childhood home, was being prepared for sale. She saw the sign go up one afternoon, a stark, professionally lettered proclamation of her displacement. "For sale," it shouted in bold red letters. She drove past without slowing down. Her place was elsewhere now. After a quick breakfast, she and Gus would make the walk to the back field. It became a ritual. Gus, revitalized by his new purpose, would trot ahead and immediately take up his position by the wall, a furry, steadfast gargoyle. Alara would begin to work. At first, she wasn't sure what she was doing. She simply started clearing the brush and thorns away from the stone structure, using a pair of old shears from her mother's shed. The work was hard. The thorns tore at her clothes and her skin, her muscles ached. But with each vine she cut, with each patch of earth she cleared, she felt she was peeling back a layer of neglect, getting closer to an answer. The wall, freed from the choking vegetation, revealed itself more fully. It was not as crudely built as it first appeared. In many sections, the stones were carefully chosen, fitted together with a patient, practiced skill. It was her mother's handiwork, she was sure of it. She could almost see her, wrestling a heavy fieldstone into place, stepping back to judge the fit, her face set in concentration. But the central anomaly remained. The section where Gus kept his vigil was different. Here, the stones were smoother, more uniform. The mortar was finer, a lighter gray than the rougher cement used elsewhere. It was a patch of careful masonry in a quilt of rustic stonework. And as she ran her hand over the surface one afternoon, her fingers tracing the cool, rough texture, she felt it. A slight indentation. She knelt, brushing away the dust and moss. There, on the face of a large, flat capstone, was a carving. It was small, no bigger than her palm, and so weathered it was almost invisible. It was a flower, a columbine with its distinctive spurred petals. It was the same flower her mother used to draw in the margins of her books, the same one that grew wild in a shady corner of her garden. It was her mother's mark, a signature hidden in plain sight. Her heart began to beat a little faster. This wasn't random. This was a sign. This stone was meant to be found. For the rest of the day, she studied it. She pushed at it. It didn't budge. It was sealed tight. But the existence of the carving had changed everything. It transformed the wall from a curious folly into a deliberate construction. It was a lock, and she was sure, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was meant to find the key. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed. The image of the carved flower burned into her mind. She thought of her mother's hands, strong and capable. She thought of her quiet persistence, the way she would work at a knot until it came free. The wall was a knot, a puzzle set in stone, and her mother had trusted her to untangle it. The next morning, she went not to the field, but to the old shed behind the house. She had to force the door, its hinges rusted and stiff. Inside, it smelled of oil and damp earth and time. Her mother's tools hung in neat rows, their wooden handles worn smooth with use. She found what she was looking for in a dark corner, a long, heavy crowbar and a sledgehammer. They felt solid and real in her hands, purposeful. When she arrived at the field, Gus greeted her with a low thump of his tail, his eyes on the tools. He seemed to understand. He whined softly, a sound of anticipation. Ilara took a deep breath. She wedged the tip of the crowbar into the thin seam above the carved stone. She put her weight on it. The stone groaned. The sound of metal scraping against stone was a harsh desecration of the field's morning quiet. Ilara put all her weight into the crowbar, her muscles straining, the cold steel biting into her hands. For a long moment, nothing happened. The stone was an immovable fact, a piece of the earth's crust. Gus whined beside her, a low, anxious sound, his body tense. "It's okay, boy," she grunted, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool air. She repositioned the crowbar, finding a better purchase in a small crack at the corner of the capstone. She threw her entire body into it, a surge of desperation and adrenaline giving her strength. There was a sharp crack, the sound of a seal breaking, and the stone shifted. Just an inch, but it was enough. Hope surged through her. She worked the crowbar back and forth, widening the gap. The mortar, old and brittle, crumbled into gray dust. Finally, she was able to get her fingers underneath the edge. The stone was heavy, far heavier than she had anticipated. She heaved, her boots sliding in the soft dirt, and with a final, guttural cry of effort, she pulled the capstone free. It fell to the ground with a heavy, satisfying thud. She knelt, panting, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind the stone was a cavity, a dark, hollow space that smelled of cool, undisturbed earth and something else, something metallic and dry. It was a chamber, built into the heart of the wall. And inside, nestled on a bed of dry straw, was a long, tin document tube. It was gray and cylindrical, like something an architect might carry, with a tight-fitting cap on each end. The seam of the main cap was sealed with a thick, unbroken disc of dark red wax. In the center of the wax, pressed deep while it was still warm, was another impression. It was the same columbine flower, her mother's sigil. This was it. This was the core of the mystery, the reason for the wall, for the years of silent, patient labor. Her hands trembled as she reached into the dark space and lifted the tube out. It was cool to the touch and heavier than she expected. It felt substantial. It felt like a testament. She sat back on her heels in the dirt, the tube cradled in her lap, and just looked at it. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, casting a warm light on the scene. The hawk circled overhead. Gus came and rested his heavy head on her knee, his old eyes looking from the tube to her face and back again. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath. This was a message from the past, a voice from the other side of silence. Her mother had built a fortress of stone and secrets, a time capsule waiting for the right person to open it. And she had chosen Ilara. Not Cora with her sharp mind. Not Lena with her gentle heart. Her. The overlooked one. The one who had stayed. The one who knew the language of the land. It was a burden and an honor all at once. She ran her thumb over the wax seal, over the delicate, perfect impression of the flower. To break it felt like a violation, but not to break it felt like a betrayal. If you have stayed with this story this far, if you have walked with Ilara into the forgotten field and felt the cold stone under your fingers, then stay a little longer. Because what was waiting inside that tube wasn't just paper, it was a promise, it was a reckoning. And it is the part I have been waiting to tell you. What Marion had hidden was not a treasure map leading to gold, but something far more valuable. It was a truth, buried in stone and soil, waiting for the one person she knew would be patient enough to listen for it. The decision of when to open the tube weighed on Ilara. It felt too sacred a thing to do in the open field, too important to rush. She carried it back to her small rented room, a quiet procession of one woman and an old dog. She placed the tin cylinder on the single, rickety table, where it dominated the space, a stark, metallic presence full of untold history. For 2 days, she just looked at it. She would circle it, touch its cool surface, run her thumb over the wax seal. It was a final conversation with her mother, and she was not ready for it to be over. The not knowing was a space where her mother's voice was still a possibility, a whisper just on the edge of hearing. To open it would be to have the last word, and she feared the silence that would follow. Her hesitation was shattered by the shrill ring of her phone. It was Cora. Her sister's voice was crisp, businesslike, with an undercurrent of forced patience she always used when she felt Ilara was being slow or difficult. Ilara, hi. I have some wonderful news. She didn't wait for a response. We've had a fantastic offer on the house. A developer. He's planning a beautiful new community, Oak Hill Estates. The name dripped with manufactured prestige. It's more than we hoped for. The deal is practically done. Ilara remained silent, clutching the phone. She could picture Cora in her sleek city office, pacing by a window with a view of other tall buildings. There's just one tiny little detail, Cora continued, her tone shifting slightly, becoming even more reasonable, which was always a warning sign. The developer, Mr. Sterling, needs to secure an access easement to bring in his equipment. His preferred route is through the top corner of your field. It's the most direct path. An easement, a road, through her field, the image of bulldozers tearing through the tall grass, crushing the wildflowers, filled her with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. He's prepared to be very generous, of course, Cora said quickly, as if sensing her resistance. He's offering $5,000. For a simple right-of-way. It's free money, Ilara. You don't have to do a thing. $5,000. The price of a used car. The price of scarring the land her mother had so carefully tended. It was an insult. Cora, Don't be difficult, Ilara. Cora's voice hardened, the velvet glove slipping to reveal the iron fist. This is a multi-million-dollar project. It's real money. Our money. Don't you dare ruin this for us over a patch of weeds. Mr. Sterling needs an answer by the end of the week. The town council meeting to approve the preliminary plans is on Friday. He needs the easement secured before then. The line went dead. The threat was not veiled. It was delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had always gotten their way. They still saw her as a simpleton, a pushover who could be bought for a pittance or intimidated into compliance. They had underestimated her. They had always underestimated her. The phone call was a clarion call. The time for quiet contemplation was over. The developer, the council meeting, the deadline. The stakes were no longer just personal and historical. They were immediate and urgent. Her mother's secret was not just a story to be uncovered, but a weapon to be wielded. That evening, as a low, mournful rain began to fall, streaking the single window of her room, Ilara sat at the table. Gus rested his head on her feet, a warm, solid weight in the lonely quiet. With a small, sharp knife from the kitchen, she carefully sliced around the edge of the wax seal. It came away cleanly, a perfect red disc with a flower impressed upon it. Her mother's last word. She slid the cap off the tube. The air filled with the dry, sweet scent of old paper. She tipped the cylinder, and a tightly rolled sheaf of documents slid into her hand. She unrolled them carefully on the table, her fingers trembling slightly. The first document was a map, but it was not a modern survey, printed and precise. This was old, drawn by hand on thick, yellowed linen paper. The ink was faded from black to a soft brown. The lettering was elegant, cursive, done with a cartographer's flair. At the top it read, "A Survey of the Abernathy Homestead, 1928. Her great-grandfather's name. This was the original deed, the genesis of their family's life on this land. She traced the boundaries with her finger, the lines familiar but somehow different. And then she saw it. In the center of the parcel designated as the backfield, there was a small, hand-drawn circle with wavy lines inside it, and a simple notation, Town Spring. But there was more. Tucked inside the rolled survey was another, smaller piece of paper, a letter folded into a tiny square. The handwriting was her mother's, familiar and comforting. Ilara unfolded it. It was not a long letter. It was direct, practical, and filled with a love that was as solid and unadorned as a fieldstone. "My dearest Ilara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you listen to the land and not to the noise. I knew you would. That is why this is for you." Her eyes filled with tears, blurring the words. She blinked them back, refusing to miss a single one. "The wall you found is not a wall. It is a shelter. The backfield is not worthless. It is the source. The marshy patch everyone dismisses is the original spring for this town. When your grandfather bought this land, the spring was the reason. But years later, the town drilled a new well, tapped the deeper aquifer, and this one was forgotten. The records were archived, the memory faded, but the water never stopped. Your grandfather, a good man, legally deeded the spring itself and its rights to the town in perpetuity, long before the new well was even a thought. He believed water was a gift, not a commodity. He feared a day would come when people would forget that. I have spent my life protecting it from being paved over, polluted, or sold by those who only see value in what can be counted. The developer, Mr. Sterling, Oak Hill Estates. He wanted to cap it, to kill it, to build a road over it for his monstrous machines. The records are in the town archives, the letter continued, filed under Water Rights and Easements, 1934. They will have dust on them, blow it off, remind them. A promise made to the land is a promise kept. The rest of the estate, the house, the money, it is just paper and noise. This water, this is your inheritance. It is not a thing to be owned, but a thing to be guarded. Water is more than wealth, it is life. Protect it." The letter was signed simply, Mom. Beneath the letter was one more document. It was a copy of the deed her mother mentioned, a formal, legal document from 1934, bearing the town's seal and her grandfather's signature, granting rights to the springhead and a 50-foot protective radius around it to the citizens of the township forever. Ilara sat back, the papers spread before her like a battle plan. Her mother had not left her defenseless. She had left her armed. She had given her a shield of stone and a sword of paper. The grief that had been a heavy, suffocating blanket for months began to transform. It sharpened into a point. It became anger, clean and righteous. It became purpose. She looked at the old survey again, a new thought striking her. She compared it to the modern plat map stapled to the deed her sisters had given her. The lines were mostly the same, but not exactly. On the old map, the western boundary of the backfield was drawn with a slight, almost imperceptible curve. The new map showed a perfectly straight line. The difference was small, maybe 20 feet at its widest point. But that 20-foot sliver, she realized with a jolt that shot through her, ran directly along the edge of the main house's driveway. According to this old, original map, the one that would have been filed with the first deed, that 20-foot strip of land was not part of the main property. It was part of the backfield. It was hers. Her sisters, in their haste and their greed, in their reliance on a new, careless survey, had not only given her the moral high ground, they had given her the gate. The town council meeting was held in the old municipal building, a place that smelled of floor wax and civic duty. The room was paneled in dark wood, and the faces of former mayors looked down from the walls with stern, painted expressions. The air was thick with a mixture of boredom and low-stakes tension. Ilara slipped into a seat at the back, clutching a worn leather satchel containing her mother's legacy. She saw her sisters near the front, sitting beside a man in a crisp, expensive suit. He had to be Mr. Sterling, the developer. He exuded an aura of confident, easy power. Cora caught her eye and gave a small, tight nod, an acknowledgement that was also a dismissal. Lena looked at her for a moment longer, a flicker of something, anxiety perhaps, in her eyes before she turned back to the front. The meeting droned on, with zoning variances and budget reports. Ilara felt a strange calm settle over her. She was not the same person who had walked out of the lawyer's office a few weeks ago. That person was lost, grieving, and small. This person had a purpose. She had the weight of her mother's trust and her grandfather's integrity behind her. Finally, the chairman announced the next agenda item: preliminary plan review for the Oak Hill Estates development. Mr. Sterling strode to the podium. He was smooth, charming, and polished. He spoke of progress, of community enhancement, of increasing the town's tax base. He unrolled a large, glossy architectural rendering of the proposed subdivision. It showed cookie-cutter houses on manicured lawns, all connected by curving, sterile streets. It was a vision of placeless prosperity. Our plan is to create a premier living community that honors the natural beauty of the area, he said, his voice resonating with false sincerity. He then pointed to a smaller map showing the construction phases. To facilitate efficient and safe access for our equipment, we have secured an agreement for a temporary construction easement through an adjacent, undeveloped parcel. He gestured vaguely to the east. It will require some minor grading and the capping of a small, seasonal marshy patch, which is currently just a breeding ground for mosquitoes. A murmur of assent went through the council. Mosquitoes were unpopular. Once construction is complete, the area will be restored and landscaped. He smiled, as if he were doing the land a favor by paving it. He folded his plans. I'm happy to answer any questions. The chairman looked around. Does anyone from the public wish to speak on this matter? Silence. Ilara stood up. Her movement was so quiet it barely registered, but a few heads turned. She walked to the podium. She felt small and plain in her simple jeans and her mother's old shawl. Her hands were not manicured. They had dirt under the nails. Mr. Sterling gave her a condescending smile, stepping aside. Yes? The chairman asked, a hint of impatience in his voice. My name is Ilara, she said, her voice soft but clear in the quiet room. That undeveloped parcel is my land, and that marshy patch is not a marsh. She took the old linen map from her satchel and unrolled it on the podium. The contrast between its aged, graceful lines and Sterling's glossy rendering was stark. This is the original survey of the property from 1928. As you can see, the area Mr. Sterling plans to cap is marked here. It's the Old Town Spring. A ripple of surprise went through the room. A few of the older residents murmured to each other. The name Abernathy Homestead on the map had stirred a memory. That spring was deeded to the town in 1934, Ilara continued, her voice gaining strength. She slid the copy of the deed on top of the map. By my grandfather, the water rights belong to the people of this town, in perpetuity. Capping it is not minor grading, it's illegal. The council members leaned forward, peering at the documents. The town clerk, a woman with sharp eyes, came over and examined the deed. She looked up at the chairman and gave a slow, deliberate nod. "It's authentic," she said. Mr. Sterling's smile had vanished. His face was a mask of disbelief. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "Some ancient document." Cora stood up, her face flushed with anger. "This is a ridiculous stunt. That land is a worthless swamp. She's just being difficult because she's unhappy with the inheritance settlement." The personal attack hung in the air, ugly and raw. It was a mistake. The sympathy in the room, which had been with the developer, began to shift. Mr. Abernathy, sitting in the front row, stood up slowly. All eyes turned to him. "Her mother knew," he said, his voice filling the room. "Marion knew. She spent half her life protecting that spring. She told me once, 'You measure twice before you cut, but you measure 100 times before you sell what isn't yours.'" His eyes landed on Sterling, then on Cora. "That water belongs to all of us. It's not for sale." Then Alara delivered the final blow. She pointed to the old map again. "There's one more thing," she said quietly. "The new survey, the one my sisters used for the estate division, is incorrect." She traced the western boundary of her field. "The original boundary is 20 feet further west. That 20-foot strip includes the entire driveway to the main house." A collective gasp went through the room. Cora and Lena stared at her, their faces pale with shock. "Mr. Sterling looked as if he had been punched. "The house my sisters are trying to sell you," Alara said, looking directly at the developer, "is legally landlocked. It has no access to the road. Not without crossing my property." The room erupted in hushed chaos. The developer's plan was not just complicated, it was dead. The house was unsellable. The sisters' smug, clean transaction had just exploded in their faces. In a single, quiet moment, the overlooked daughter, armed with nothing but the truth and an old piece of paper, had reclaimed not just a spring, but her own power. She had not raised her voice. She had not made a threat. She had simply laid the truth on the table and let it do its work. A few days after the disastrous town meeting, a car Alara didn't recognize pulled up to the edge of the field. It wasn't Cora's sharp, silver sedan or Mr. Sterling's black luxury vehicle. It was a modest, slightly dusty hatchback. Lena got out. She stood for a moment, looking smaller and more uncertain than Alara had ever seen her. She was not wearing a suit. She was in jeans and a simple sweater, looking like a ghost of the sister Alara had known as a child, before the city had claimed her. She walked slowly toward Alara, who was clearing stones near the springhead. Gus, lying nearby, lifted his head and gave a single, low growl. "It's okay, boy," Alara said softly, and the dog settled, though his eyes remained fixed on the visitor. Lena stopped a few feet away, her hands shoved deep in her pockets. She didn't seem to know what to do with them. "The deal is off," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Sterling walked. "The house is unsellable. Cora is furious. She's talking to lawyers. She says you did it out of spite." Alara said nothing. She picked up a loose stone and tested its weight in her hand, her gaze steady on her sister's face. Lena's composure finally broke. Her shoulders slumped, and a dry, ragged sob escaped her. "She's wrong," Lena whispered, tears now streaming down her face. "You didn't do it out of spite. You did it because it was right. And we were wrong. I was wrong." She looked around at the field, at the half-rebuilt wall, at the clear water now pooling where Alara had cleared away the mud and debris. "Mom loved this place. She tried to show us, but we wouldn't see. We just saw weeds. We saw something that didn't have a price tag." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture of futility. "I knew it was wrong, what we did to you in that office. I knew it was cruel. But I was afraid of Cora. I wanted the money. I told myself it was for the best, that you were happier with simple things." It was a lie I told myself so I could sleep at night. The confession hung in the quiet air, raw and unadorned. It was the first true thing Lena had said in years. She looked at Alara, her eyes full of a shame so profound it was painful to witness. "I helped you pack up Mom's things," Alara said, her voice quiet but not unkind. "I remember. You were the one who polished the silver." It was a small memory, a moment of shared, mundane work in the shadow of their mother's passing. Lena flinched, as if the memory were a physical blow. The silver they had so carefully polished and then sold. "What can I do?" Lena asked, her voice cracking. "How can I? I can't fix it. But what can I do?" Alara looked at her sister for a long moment. She saw the years of weakness, of following Cora's lead, of choosing the easier path. But she also saw, for the first time, a flicker of their mother's character, the desire to make things right, to pay a debt. Revenge would have been easy, a sharp word, a turned back. It was what Cora would have done. It was what the world expected. But her mother's currency was not spite, it was work. It was restoration. Alara turned and walked to the pile of tools. She picked up a second pair of thick work gloves, the leather stiff and new. She walked back to Lena and held them out. Lena stared at the gloves as if she'd never seen such a thing before. "The north side of the wall was damaged by a frost heave last winter," Alara said, her voice even. "The stones need to be reset before the ground freezes again." Lena looked from the gloves to Alara's face, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding. There was no lecture, no demand for apology, just an invitation to labor, an offering of a way back. Slowly, hesitantly, Lena reached out and took the gloves. She pulled them on. They were clumsy on her hands, hands accustomed to keyboards and coffee cups. But she did it, she had begun. The path to amends was not through words or money. It was through the slow, humble, honest work of rebuilding what had been broken, one stone at a time. Life settled into a new rhythm, one dictated by the seasons and the needs of the land. Cora sent a letter from her lawyer, a crisp, threatening document full of legal jargon about right-of-way by necessity and contesting the original survey. Alara read it, folded it, and used it to light the small fire she made in a stone-ringed pit on cool evenings. Then came a second letter, this one with an offer, a generous sum of money for the 20-foot strip of land that held the driveway hostage. It was more money than Alara had ever seen. She could have bought a small house, a new car, a life of ease. She could have taken the money and walked away, leaving her sisters to their broken deal. She wrote a single word on the bottom of the offer letter, "No," and mailed it back. Her refusal was not about leverage or revenge. It was a statement of values. The field and the spring were not for sale. Her mother's legacy could not be converted into cash. The story of the town meeting spread, as stories do in small towns, carried on currents of gossip from the general store to the post office to the diner. At first, people were just surprised. Then, they were impressed. Finally, they were moved. They remembered Marion. They remembered her quiet kindnesses, the unasked for help, the tomatoes on the porch. And they saw in her youngest daughter the same core of integrity. They started to show up. It began with Mr. Abernathy, who arrived one Saturday with a new, perfectly balanced wheelbarrow and a load of sand and cement mix. "Your mother was my best customer," he said gruffly, avoiding her eyes. "Figured she'd want her account settled. Paid in full." Soon after, a retired mason named George appeared. He had heard about the wall and came to inspect it, running a practiced hand over the stones. "Your mother had a good eye, but her mortar mix was a little sandy," he'd announced, and then proceeded to spend the next 3 weeks teaching Alara the art of repointing, of fitting stone to stone, so it looked like it had grown there. A woman from the local gardening club brought a tray of native seedlings, columbine, of course, and wild ginger, to plant around the newly cleared springhead. The high school history teacher came with his class to see the spring, and they spent an afternoon clearing brush, their youthful energy a bright, cheerful noise in the quiet field. They brought her food. Casseroles and thermoses of soup would appear on the flat top of the wall, left by people who understood the hunger that comes from hard physical work. They didn't ask for thanks. They were simply repaying a debt to a woman who had given so much. They were a community, reforming itself around a shared principle. They were a found family, built not on blood, but on the shared work of preservation. Lena continued to come. Every Saturday, her little hatchback would pull up. She never offered excuses for Cora's absence or the angry silence from that side of the family. She just put on her gloves and worked. She was clumsy at first, but she was persistent. She learned to mix mortar, to wield a trowel, to see the way the stones fit together. The work was changing her. The sun and the wind weathered her face, and the labor put calluses on her soft hands. She spoke less and listened more. One afternoon, as they sat sharing a thermos of tea, Lena looked at the clear water bubbling up from the ground. "I never understood why she loved it out here," she said quietly. "Now I do. It's real. My whole life in the city, it doesn't feel real anymore. It's just paper and noise." She had quoted their mother without realizing it. Alara smiled, a true warm smile. The spring, once a muddy secret, was now a small, pristine pool, its water cold and clear. The wall was strong and solid, a protective embrace. The field was no longer a symbol of what she had lost, but a testament to what could be built when one person chose meaning over money. It was a living inheritance, growing richer not with interest, but with every act of care, every stone set, every person who came to help. Spring came fully by mid-April, and the field exploded with life. The seeds the garden club had brought took root, and the ground around the pool was carpeted with green shoots and the first shy blossoms of columbine. The great oak tree leafed out, its canopy a vast, rustling ceiling of green. The air was sweet with the scent of damp earth and new growth. The place had been transformed, healed by attention and communal effort. Alara had changed too. The grief for her mother was still there, a quiet ache in her heart, but it was no longer a hollow space. It had been filled with purpose, with the good, tired feeling of physical work, with the warmth of her newfound community. She was no longer the overlooked daughter. She was the keeper of the spring, a title that held more weight and honor than any CEO or board member. The town, in a formal vote, officially named the site Marion Spring and designated it a local landmark. A simple, hand-carved wooden sign, made by Mr. Abernathy, was placed at the trailhead. It was a quiet, profound victory. Cora never came. The house on the hill remained empty, the for sale sign growing faded and tilted. It was a monument to greed, its value erased not by a market crash, but by a simple refusal to sell a 20-foot strip of integrity. Lena, however, had bought a small cottage on the edge of town. She had quit her city job. She now worked part-time at the local library, the same one where Alara had found the dusty records, and spent her free afternoons at the field. The sisters didn't talk much about the past. They didn't need to. Their shared work was its own language of forgiveness and reconciliation. They were rebuilding their relationship, one stone, one shared silence at a time. One hot afternoon in late summer, as the cicadas buzzed their relentless song, Alara was sitting on a smooth, sun-warmed stone by the edge of the pool. Gus was asleep in a patch of shade, his paws twitching as he dreamed. A young family she didn't recognize, a father, a mother, and a small child of about 5 or 6, were walking along the public path that now skirted the edge of the field. They stopped to read the sign. The child, hot and thirsty, looked longingly at the clear, cool water. "Daddy, can I have a drink?" the little girl asked. The father hesitated, looking at Alara. "I don't know, sweetie. I'm not sure if we're allowed." Alara stood up. She walked to the edge of the spring-fed pool. She remembered her mother's hands, cupped to hold water for a thirsty bird, for a wilting plant, for Alara herself when she was a child. She remembered her mother's lesson, the one that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with grace. She knelt, just as her mother would have done. She cupped her hands together, dipped them into the shockingly cold water, and lifted them, a perfect, shimmering bowl of life. She walked over to the little girl and held out her hands. "It's for everyone," she said softly. The child looked at her father, who nodded with a grateful smile. The little girl leaned forward and drank from Alara's hands, the cool water dribbling down her chin. It was a simple act, an echo of 1,000 unseen kindnesses performed by her mother on this very land. The legacy was not in the deed, not in the wall, not even in the water itself. It was here, in this moment. It was in the giving. It was in the understanding that some things are not meant to be owned, but to be shared. As the family walked on, their thanks a bright note in the summer air, Alara looked at her hands, still wet with the spring water. She saw not just her own reflection, but the reflection of her mother, her grandfather, and a long line of quiet keepers. The inheritance was safe. The work would continue. Some things you measure with your heart. The rest is just noise.
Okay, we need this aspire tree. We'll just make one. I like that gaming chair, but we also don't have the color to change it back to anything, so maybe not. Okay. That's fine. Do you like those surface lights? Oh wait, we need to put this gaming light in our house now. Maybe we put all those up. Are there shinies in this game? No, not yet, baby heart. I don't know if they plan on adding it, but like, yeah, there aren't any shinies, but there are legendaries. And mythics if you want to get like super technical on it. That mug is the perfect size mug. Thank you, Mom Spaghetti. Not the bowl mug TM. Okay, what's on the back of this? That is B, right? Okay. There we go. Our mural is coming along nicely, guys.